have met a few people who like doing this sort of thing. They're a nuisance, I agree, but pretty hard. You have certainly seen problems like this. They're not a nuisance, they're a real danger. Stop it, you!
50 years ago, government information films used humour to conceal a deadly serious message.
What do you think this is for?
Coughs and sneezes spread diseases, and disease itself was no laughing matter. But in the days before the National Health Service, the only thing that was free about medicine for most people was advice on the correct use of handkerchief.
Now, handkerchief, sneeze. Got it? Fine. Fine. Now you can carry on.
An American professor of history once claimed that it was hard for the average Englishman to even imagine what life would be like without the National Health Service. That's true. In 50 years since it was set up, we've become so accustomed to the NHS that it's easy to forget the difference it made to this country. Yet the story behind its foundation is one of the great tales of British history. Because before the NHS, illness was not just some occasional worrying event with the expectation of cure at the end of it. It was common, frightening, expensive, and all too often fatal.
Britain in the 30s was not a healthy place. 1 in 15 children died before they were 11. In places it was 1 in 10, a rate we now think of as third world.
Playmate died. I mean, people think today nobody should die, especially children. They mustn't die, they shouldn't die. In that days, you got quite used to the funeral coming along. You just took it for granted that your mates had gone. It was normal, really.
In particular, for the main diseases of childhood, like diphtheria, polio and scarlet fever, there were few effective treatments.
You'd be in class one day and then another day there'd be an disgrace there, and morning prayer the teacher would say, "Oh, I will say a prayer for Mary today, she's gone to Jesus."
Death came early from the adults too.
Now, brothers, here are this week's birthday.
Achieving old age was cause for celebration.
Number 517, Mr. A. Bassett, 70 on 26.
But with life expectancy in 1936 just 60, most people didn't make it that far.
Mr. J. Hester, Mr. J. Hester.
My father had been playing rugby for Hulkingston Rovers, and he was a big, strapping man. He came home, and he had a sweat on and a cold and what have you. And pneumonia, 38 years old, he was dead in a week.
Bad housing, malnutrition and insanitary conditions meant the poor were particularly vulnerable to disease. But there were more fundamental reasons why poverty was dangerous. By the 1930s, there were treatments for many illnesses, but lots of poor families simply couldn't afford them. The so-called panel system, funded by national insurance, did provide basic treatment for workers, but their dependents, usually their wives and children, still had to pay to see a doctor. Dr. Alistair Clark ran a pre-NHS practice in a poor area near Glasgow. There, seeing the doctor was a luxury many women could not afford.
The charge at that time for a visit to surgery was 1 in 6, but there certainly was no doubt that wives did not come because they were wanting to pay the 1 in 6. And I suppose 1 in 6 in these days would buy quite a lot of housekeeping, the food.
They didn't call a doctor unless it was absolutely necessary. No way could people afford to throw money away. We'd have a go at it first, to see if we could get it right, and if not, then we'd call a doctor.
Lillian Morehouse grew up in the 30s in a mill town near Bradford. Her mother was one of a nationwide band of wise women who dispensed free advice and homemade remedies to those who couldn't afford the doctor.
This is about very similar to the thing that my mother had, full of all sorts of things that she would use. Earache. For a pot of your own water, that means wee, of warm teaspoon into the ear. Can you imagine it? Head sores. Heat it white in 1 egg to a stiff froth. Add 2 tablespoonfuls of spirit wine and apply with a feather. You turn the bottom up and I'll stick it with a feather.
Bizarre home remedies weren't just used for minor ailments.
If you had a child with hookah, believe it or not, you'd wrap it up, take it along the road to find the road maker was tarring the roads.
It was thought that The few from the boy tar were efficacious, especially to children. So there was all a crowd of kids around the table taking deep breaths, deep breaths. And it felt good. It felt good going up your nose. All the kids are going away with this glazed looks in their eyes.
If home remedies failed, lack of money often forced families to wait until a child was dangerously ill before calling in a doctor. Anne Westwood was brought up in a rundown part of Birmingham by her grandparents.
My grandma, one time, she actually put a mirror over my mouth to see if I was still breathing because I'd got a very bad infected throat. And she got my grandma's suit, tied it into a bundle and took it down to the pawn shop, Uncle Johnny's as it was called, to get the money to take me to the doctors.
In the case of diphtheria, which killed 1 in 5 if it wasn't caught early, such delay could be fatal. Families who couldn't raise the cash were left in debt to the doctor, with instalments collected by a doctor's man. Then King took on the job in Manchester in 1939.
People with large families couldn't afford running up the bill. There was no possibility of settling that bill unless they won pools or something like that.
Friday night used to be the night when everybody called. Dad had come home this wages at 5 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, the coalman had been his little bit off the bill. The insurance man had been, as we call him, pen deaf, and the doctor man would come and he would they would come in, they'd stand on the doorstep and mark 6pence off the bill.
Walk up to the door, you'd hear the sounds of family life going on behind the door, but as soon as you knocked it would all go quiet. And sometimes you would think, oh well, fair enough, I'll leave them this week. But other times you would persist, and on this particular occasion I persisted not and not, until eventually a little girl of 6 or 7 opened the door and said, Mum says she's not in.
Many doctors were reluctant to charge the poor, but they too had to make ends meet.
Not only did GPs depend on their patients for their income, but to buy into a practice was an expensive business. An average practice cost 2 to 3 years' earnings, so lots of family doctors began their professional lives in debt themselves. Despite this, many recognised that the poorest of their patients simply couldn't pay, and they found themselves playing Robin Hood.
We went over the patient once a month and we were making up the accounts. And probably about a quarter of them I would say to my wife, they can't afford to pay anything. Forget them.
Just wrote them off?
We just wrote the account off.
So you were effectively treating a lot of patients for nothing?
Well, it sounds terribly holy-willy, but it's true.
Others were less scrupulous. Many doctors supplement their incomes by selling their own medicines, made up of them by local pharmacists.
We'll make hay while the sun shines. We'll make love when it rains.
But as apprentice pharmacist Charlie Bannister discovered, there was less some of the medicines than patients imagined.
We had next door Dr. Mellon, really right, one formula, Mr. Albert.
Mr. Albert?
What? It was a mixture of some salts, magnesia, peppermint. And I used to go down the basement with an old galvanised iron bath, mix it all up, and laid off any scum that was medicine for everything and everybody, my Mr. Albert. Now, he was not alone like that. Along the road, there was another doctor, Dr. Kennedy. What he arranged was we'd go on holiday. He used to do a packet of prescriptions, and every prescription written the same thing, mist, rye, almond, and soda. He signed it, left it with his wife, and said, in every case, give this to the patient, tell the patient to go to the chemist.
Whatever was wrong with them,
That's
his
right.
wife gave them his prescription.
Yes.
And what was in this mixture?
Rhubarb.
Rhubarb.
I think rhubarb was kind of a laxative, if I remember rightly.
Did it have any medical effect apart from that?
Shall I say, did no harm.
Did no harm.
Did no harm. If a person could walk to our chemist and walk out again, fine.
The failure of panel system to cover anyone but low-paid workers inevitably led to calls for reform. The Labour opposition and the British Medical Association alike argued that national insurance should at least be extended to worker dependents. The Tory government argued the slump made reform financially impossible.
And there was another reason behind the reluctance to extend the system. The Conservatives of the 1930s believed in self-help and minimal government. The Ministry of Health had a limited role in tackling specific public health problems, like the spread of disease, but the provision of health care to the individual was not primarily the responsibility of the state.
It was in dentistry that failings in healthcare were most visible. Tooth decay was widespread, but dental treatment wasn't covered at all. For those without money, there was a solution of sorts.
A high proportion of people, by the age of about 21, preferred to have all their teeth taken out, mostly for economic reasons.
So it was cheaper to have a lot taken out?
It was cheaper to have a lot taken out. It was often a 21st birthday present.
So having all your teeth taken out wasn't stigma?
It was taken a routine. If somebody around about the age of 40 had teeth, we can have a look. It was quite phenomenal.
in the Black Country, parents would have their daughters' teeth taken out completely before they married, so that they wouldn't have any problems with teeth after they were married, so it wouldn't be a bother to the husbands.
False teeth were expensive, but here too, economy could be made.
We used to see people come in, and the dentures seemed a little bit odd. We asked them, "Are you sure these dentures were yours?" "No, my uncle died, and I inherited them." This is not uncommon, very sadly.
The traffic in false teeth could even be two-way, as Lillian Morehouse discovered when, as a young nurse, she had to lay out a patient who died.
We sent the son to come have a look. We'd tell him, and he puts his head around the screen and says, "Oh, am I too late?" I said, "Well, I'm sorry, yes." Oh, he said, "No, not too late." He said, "He hasn't come. You give those teeth back. I only rented them to come into hospital with the mine."
But if the dentist and the doctor were to be avoided, then for many, hospital remained literally the last place to go if you were ill.
Hi, I'll be there in 20 minutes.
Oh no, anything can go wrong except your hair colour with Bell Colour 20-minute colorist gel from Laboratoire Garnier, complete with natural oils.
So easy to shampoo in, no mess.
And because it's Bell Colour, the result is beautifully natural-looking permanent colour.
Your colour can't go wrong. It looks great and feels so soft. Incredible.
Ordered Marie Claire Prix d'Excellence hair care. Bell Colour, formulated and controlled by Laboratoire Garnier. Needs specs.
No brakes!
Worship me. Heat extractions.
Can't watch. At Boots, they now have a range of different health cover and travel cover plans. You simply pick them off the shelf, pay the till, you're covered. Want peace of mind? Like simplicity. Love Boots.
Nicole.
Yes!
I was about to go out live on air where suddenly my stomach started to rumble. Then I realised I hadn't had my shreddies.
Hunger strikes!
I should have known better. It's shreddies with their layer upon layer of whole wheat and great taste that keep hunger locked up. Tomorrow, shreddies all over the country will keep hunger at bay until about lunchtime.
Shreddies and roasted shreddies keep hunger locked up at lunch.
Don't put it off. Put it on. Barleycard.
They may have opened hospitals. As late as the 1930s, few rich people would dream of being treated in one. They were attended to at home or in private nursing homes. The hospitals had been built for the poor.
Britain's hospital system, such as it was a product of the 19th century. In 1919, following the creation of the Ministry of Health, the government had produced plans for a comprehensive national service, but budget cuts and the slump meant that these plans were soon shelved. Britain left the hospital system was not just Victorian, and in some places Dickensian, divided against itself.
For patients who couldn't afford private nursing homes, there were two very different alternatives. The lucky ones went to voluntary hospitals, like Bart's, St Thomas's, the London Hospital, and the many small cottage hospitals dotted around the country. Founded as charities by philanthropists and still dependent on donations, many retained strong links with the gentry. In places, admission itself remained in the gift of local worthies.
People had to get a sort of reference from a counsellor or a GP
or somebody of that nature, just make sure you were one of the deserving boy. You have to make sure that it's the first character before you go into hospital.
But by the 30s, the voluntary hospitals were in deep financial trouble. Many were on the verge of bankruptcy, leading to emotional public appeals.
We not only restore health, but we preserve it. And this is a very costly business. That is why we need shillings and pence as badly as we needed it 200 years ago. You will help us carry on this great work, won't you?
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven.
In town after town, the annual parade to raise funds for local hospital was an unmissable event. But it wasn't just the gentry and charitable members of the public who were expected to contribute. Relatives visiting their loved ones in hospital were a particularly easy target.
At the end of every ward, just before the visitors arrived, there'd be a chair placed and there was a bowl, like a basin. We called it the begging bowl. Everybody who came in was expected to put something in it. And I forget to say, you dare pass, put it hand in your pocket.
And there's one source of funding that the voluntary hospitals have come to rely on above all, the patients themselves. Hospital treatment was not free. Some workers paid weekly to funds that provided money for treatment in an emergency. But other patients were subject to a stringent means test, administered by a group of women known as Lady Almoners. Audrey Lees began training as Lady Almoner in 1935.
They had to pay, and they couldn't pay. We had to assess them and then try and get charities to fund them. And very few of the patients really could pay.
Was it a great worry to them? They came in hospital and they couldn't pay?
It was a great worry to some of them, yes. I think the case that made me feel the saddest was a girl of 19 living in an attic with 3 tiny children. And she really hadn't got enough food for herself or for them. And she said to me, "It's not for myself I'm asking. My life's finished. It's for my children."
And she was 19?
She was 19.
So did you see yourselves as social workers, despite the rather grand title?
Oh, utterly, yes.
The top voluntary hospitals, like London's teaching hospitals, prided themselves on their independence and quality of care. Those fortunate enough to be admitted could expect to be treated by top Harley Street consultants, specialists at the pinnacle of the profession, who were treated accordingly.
The consultant would get out of his Rolls Royce and he'd expect a student to come and pin a road on his lapel as he went into the hospital. They were the important people, everyone ran around them.
Among doctors, there was great competition for positions at the top teaching hospitals. But it wasn't because of a consultant's wages.
He wasn't paid at all. He earned his living in private practice. But of course, there was a spin-off from the teaching, because these students were going to become general practitioners, and they would be referring in difficult cases in private practice.
It was the only way, actually, to get on to the top of the profession. You had to be on one of the hospitals.
It wasn't entirely altruistic.
It certainly was not altruistic, no.
Good morning. Despite consultants working for free, the voluntary hospitals increasingly relied on seat handouts for the very survival. But they opposed full government funding, not only because it threatened private independence, but because if they ceased to be charities, then the consultants would start charging them.
And while the military might bail out hospitals in an emergency, it had no interest at all in actually taking over and running them. And so, to stave off financial ruin, many voluntary hospitals had introduced expensive pay beds, which consultants could use to treat their private patients. One consultant was particularly keen on tonsillectomies, which wasn't surprising at 20 guineas a throw.
I think it was a nice bit of lucrative income for him. He'd say, have a look at that drawings. I think they ought to come out, don't you? Of course, I'd say, oh, yes, sir, yes, sir. And, of course, I didn't think they needed to come out. And one day I said, well, I think they look all right, sir. He didn't like it very much. I don't think I got another job at that hospital after that.
Even for patients who weren't in private beds, the cost could be crippling. In 1937, Florence Wested's mother and sister were in hospital in Wigan. Mother was dying.
I remember going down the corridor of the hospital. To me, it's never ending. I can just picture Mother's face, very yellow and ill looking, with all these white sheets straight. And we just stood at the end of the bed, looking at her, and nobody spoke anything.
Shortly afterwards, Florence's father was summoned to discuss the growing hospital bill.
Now, there was just one man in this office, and he spoke with a lot of authority. He said to my father, "You'll have to pay 9 shillings a week off this hospital arrears."
Florence's mother died a month later, but the question of her sister's treatment remained, and there was another problem. The voluntary hospitals only ever had enough beds to treat a minority of the country's sick, so consultants could afford to be selective. They preferred patients they could treat successfully, or use to teach, not long-term ones who might block the beds.
They encouraged the admitting officers to admit interesting patients and not ones with ordinary chronic conditions.
What did they do with them? Where did those patients go?
They went to what used to be called the old poor hospitals, the municipal hospitals.
So the patients really dumped there?
Yes, they were.
The municipal hospitals are the other side of the coin. These had grown up as part of the Victorian poor law system, in which the state granted charitable relief to the destitute with the greatest possible reluctance. In the 1930s, the local authorities had taken over the poor law infirmaries. In some places they had been drastically improved, but to the public, most remained what they'd been until then, an extension of the workhouse.
Early in 1938, Florence Westhead's sister Margaret was transferred to a former workhouse infirmary, where she remained until her death.
She was a child of what was termed as special needs. The powers that be could probably see that she was long-term. And it must have been very distressing for my father to have a child in the workhouse. And sometimes when I think about it now, I get very emotional.
Alice Hutt began nursing in a former poor infirmary in London in 1935.
They were still regarded, in everyone's memory, as the workhouse. These poor hospitals had such a reputation among the local people. It was reckoned that if you went in, you never came out. And of course, it was true.
They tend to be long dormitories with beds only 18 inches or 2 feet apart, accommodated in conditions which were, I can only say, very disturbing to visit. I remember one particularly in Leicester where there were about 500 beds and very few people were ever discharged from that. It was an eternal place.
In the worst of the old workhouse infirmaries, like this one in Cambridge, conditions had changed little since Dickens' day. And there was one group above all who went to municipal hospitals to die, the sick old.
At town, people couldn't afford to look after them. So when you were about 16, you're no longer able to support yourself. And you're walking about with a stick, and like you disappeared off the scene.
So they just disappeared into these infirmaries, that was it?
You didn't ask where's Granddad or where's the old man up the street, he just disappeared.
Just gone?
Just gone.
Unlike the voluntary hospitals, in the municipal system there were few Harley Street consultants to be found.
The Central Middlesex, in the late 1920s, had one doctor, the whole hospital, and when he was in the hospital, they used to fly the flag on a flagpole to show the doctor was in.
Even where local authorities had invested heavily in their municipal hospitals, something of the workhouse culture remained. Sir John Crofton found on a visit what was supposed to be one of London's finest.
It may be the best, but it was pretty awful. I was really horrified because they were treated like cows. When a patient came into accident emergency, the routine was they were stripped naked. I remember going down there, a poor old woman with a fractured hip, and the sheet was just ripped off and there was the poor naked man.
Just like that.
By the late 30s, the conditions in the old workhouse infirmaries, combined with the financial crisis in the voluntary hospitals, made few question the need for radical reform. But there's no agreement about how it should be achieved.
For 20 years, proposals for change had been frustrated by outright hostility between municipal and voluntary hospitals, along with fears of doctors who relied on private practice for their incomes. But out of this logjam, a new organisation emerged, the Socialist Medical Association. Its plans for reform were ambitious and controversial, but it began to attract an increasing amount of support from inside the medical professions.
Avis Hutt and her husband Russo, surgeon, were both active members of the SMA. Membership was radical for a doctor, but for Avis it was potentially a sacking offence.
We used to meet in people's houses. A subversive activity as far as nurses were concerned. We were certainly at risk of summarily being dismissed.
Belonging to the SMA?
For taking part in political activity, yes.
What did you believe in the 30s should be done about health service?
We believed in a state medical service, which was a comprehensive one, which would provide care, health care, free at time of use.
It was a scale of reform that defeated politicians and planners for 2 decades. But in 1938, fear of what would happen if enemy bombers got through would bring it about in months.
If I made football boots, what would they be like?
Now, join Cellnet 3 first, designed to cut your calling costs in a big way. They're free to join.
can also show you how from the 1st of July you could cut your cell net cost peak minutes by as much as 32%. That's 24p down to 16.3p, and off peak minutes can drop from 12p to 4p. That's a cut of over 66%. We've never done anything like this ever before. Wallace, we have a lot to talk about.
There's 53 Rosalie Avenue, Devontree, Hilltop, Hillrush, Mill Green, Aberdeen, Dunrome, Home Wheat, Homemade, Broadstairs, Small Stairs, Fletchers, and Aberdeen, Treetop, Seaview, Shane, 22, using bungalows and some stuff.
Do you have an SQ Ledby Avenue, number 8, Heraldry, Patio, Garden Gate, Thatcher, Hatchin, Kodak, and Hatchin, Timbering, the Frame.
Dunrome, Nick,
2 up,
2 down.
Anywhere, anytime, send in Suburbia, Hoodie, Suburbia. Front door, back door, black door, good door, greenhouse, new house, happy, homey, high-tech, mystery, another Dunrome.
Wherever you are, whenever you want to buy a home, it pays to decide nationwide. Change battery, change cam motor.
Nightmare High in Barcelona. The grim story varies. Most grim story yet without being horrific. Franca's aeroplanes have been over Barcelona and have dropped their bombs.
Events in Spain, rather than Britain, propelled the government to action in 1938.
So search parties clamber over the ruins, and occasionally some mangled form hanging on stubbornly to the thread of life is rescued to be carried away to eke out a brief and tortured existence.
In the month before the Second World War, Britain's Committee of Imperial Defence had to estimate how many casualties it should expect from German bombs should they fall. For its calculations, it used the so-called Barcelona ratio, established during the Spanish Civil War, which predicted that every ton of explosive dropped would produce 72 casualties.
The figures the committee came up with were terrifying. Over 1 million civilian casualties could be expected in the first 2 months of the war. A lightning survey of hospital facilities confirmed what everyone already knew. The system was hopelessly equipped to deal with casualties on this scale. Something had to be done, and done quickly before the bombs started to fall.
They had to organise a hospital system throughout the country to deal with all the casualties they expected from air raids. They really made something like a national health service essential.
This is how the emergency hospital system works.
Under the emergency medical scheme, voluntary and municipal hospitals were coordinated for the first time to a single national system. In less than a year, 1,000 new operating theatres were built, as well as hundreds of new prefabricated wards. A proper emergency ambulance system was set up, along the National Blood Transfusion Service. Inner-city wards were cleared to make room for casualties, and their patients and staff evacuated to safer provincial hospitals. The first evacuees to arrive at one emergency hospital were the elderly occupants of a former workhouse infirmary in London.
It was a horrific time, especially the poor patients. They were old, they were ill. All they had round was a label around their neck with just one word on which their diagnosis. Sometimes the name was on, and they were pretty ill, some of them. I know the first night we just lost 7. I know they were old and that, but that's not the point, is it?
When the Blitz came, it turned out the Barcelona ratio had been a huge overestimate. Despite deaths and injuries, the new system was left with capacity to spare. With fewer casualties than expected, consultants who'd been evacuated to provincial hospitals turned their hands to the problems around them.
Now have come the finest surgeon in the country to give their skill to all the people.
It took a lot of London consultants out into areas where there hadn't been local specialist services before, and it opened their eyes to some of the things that needed to be done.
War also opened up a revolutionary new avenue of treatment in the antibiotic penicillin. Most of the new drug was earmarked troops, but when the first supplies began to trickle through to hospitals back home, it became a treasured ally in the war against disease.
Penicillin's in such short supply that anyone who received it, every drop of urine was collected for the whole 24 hours, and it was taken over to a laboratory in the university who extracted the penicillin that had come through the kidneys, and it was reused. It was so scarce.
Meanwhile, the benefits of the emergency medical system were being extended. Under the scheme, all casualties were entitled to free medical treatment, but the definition proved an elastic one.
You don't necessarily have to be hit by a bomb to become a casualty. You may run into a bus or into a bad attack of appendicitis. Whatever it is, no hospital, even in a danger area, will fail to give you attention if your case is urgent.
In the end, the official list of who could be designated a casualty and receive free medical treatment ran 62 pages. What had begun as an emergency system for victims of the war had grown into an embryo National Health Service. But it was publication of this document in 1942 that raised the public expectation that such a service would be theirs in peace as well as war.
William Beveridge's report, commissioned by Churchill's government a year earlier, offered a powerful new vision of a post-war Britain.
The common people everywhere, in and out of the forces, want to know what is going to happen to them when peace comes. Want must not be known again. Ignorance, says Sir William, no democracy can nowadays afford.
I've still got my Beveridge report I bought in, I think with 2 sections. And his description of fighting the giants of ignorance, of disease, of poverty, capital letters all, read like a morality play.
The evil of disease must be overthrown. The voluntary hospital and the expensive nursing home are not enough to maintain this nation in good health. The finest surgery must be for all.
The Beveridge report envisaged a national health system, under which everyone would be entitled to free medical treatment paid for out of compulsory national insurance.
Did you feel this was the vision for the health service that you wanted?
Indeed I did. And I still get thrilled whenever I read it, because it puts it so succinctly as to what it was that needed change, and the possibilities.
Some conservatives saw Beveridge's plans as dangerously radical, not least when Beveridge himself announced a report from the Daily Telegraph that the scheme would take the country halfway to Moscow. But at a crucial stage in the war, the report offered the national government a powerful morale booster, and in his 1943 broadcast, Churchill gave his full backing.
You must rank me and my colleagues as strong partisans of national compulsory insurance from the cradle to the grave. We must establish on broad and solid foundations a national health service.
As part of the plan for reform, a detailed survey of every hospital in the country was launched. It revealed that the system was in a worse state than anyone had imagined. Not one London hospital had escaped bomb damage, while conditions in the old workhouse infirmaries often rendered them good for nothing demolition anyway. It wasn't just buildings. In Edinburgh, a measure of the scale of unmet need was uncovered by Dr. Barbara Clayton.
I was asked to look at the waiting list for prolapse of the uterus. This is where the womb hangs between a woman's legs as a big football. I mean, you wouldn't expect to see it these days. And the waiting list was in good order, and the waiting list went back 30 years.
In 1944, the first plans for the National Health Service were unveiled, not by a Labour politician, but by a Tory, the then Minister of Health, Henry Wink.
Our plan is a service which will provide the best medical advice and treatment for everyone. The National Health Service will include family doctors, will cover any medicines you may need, and of course hospital treatment, whatever the illness. There will be no charge for treatment.
But Wink's proposals met with immediate hostility from the profession. The British Medical Association argued that free healthcare for everyone would destroy private practice and force doctors to become state employees. The British Medical Journal wrote, underlying the subtle phrases of the paper is the mailed fist of bureaucratic control. The doctors rejected the proposal.
But a year later, following Labour's election victory, Willock was replaced by a very different Minister of Health. Aneurin Bevan was an ex-miner and had once been expelled from the Labour Party for being too left-wing. During the war, he'd almost been expelled again for criticising Churchill. But as a confidant calls, health was one of his abiding interests.
He was very practical-minded about health, and you couldn't hear somebody's disease without thinking about it. When I had eczema and asthma, he recommended to me the cure for it, which was to have a proper sunshine. He gave me the lamp. I've still got the lamp we gave, which I used for about 10 years, which I think is as much as the doctor said it to me for eczema.
Bevan's reputation as a demagogue preceded him, but his civil servants found his rhetoric was swiftly backed up by action.
He came into the department with everybody wondering just what this was going to be like, because he had a reputation for being rather a wild man. But he took the papers home with him and read them over the weekend, and then came back and said, we're going to take over the hospitals. This health service is going to be for everyone. It's going to be free of charge at the time of use. There to be no more sale and purchase of medical practice.
Bevan's proposals were truly revolutionary. No previous Minister of Health had ever suggested nationalising the hospitals in the way coal, steel and the railways would be. But to Bevan, it appeared the only possible solution to the problems that had hamstrung reform for 2 decades. He ordered his civil servant to draw up plans immediately.
it sort of hit them a bit like a bomb. And about 3 weeks later, they produced a paper which was the complete opposite of what they had been told to do. This appeared to the civil service to be quite normal. I sort of read it and leant back in a chair and gave a belly laugh. I said to Arthur Hooker, who was the permanent, "You can't do this to me, Sir Arthur. Go back and think again."
When Sir Arthur failed to deliver a second time, he was replaced, and there was no more trouble from the civil service. But Bevan's real problems were just beginning. Although the Conservatives still claimed to be in favour of a National Health Service, when Bevan's bill was introduced to Parliament in 1946, the Tories opposed it. They claimed nationalisation of the hospitals was a seizure of private assets, while the abolition of the sale of practices was a restriction of trade. But by opposing Bevan in Parliament, they played into his hands.
He had complete dominance of the House of Commons, which is difficult to believe today. Suddenly he would begin to lower his voice till it almost became a whisper, and you would see people craning their heads to listen. The Tories would interrupt him, and he'd turn on them immediately. And he had a very, very effective way of dealing with any interruptions. So they gave it up under official instruction from their whip.
Bevan's bill became law in 1946. He now faced the biggest obstacle of all, the medical profession. Most doctors remained vehemently opposed to the planned reforms, but Bevan knew the real power lay in consultants, represented by the 3 Royal Colleges. If he could win them over, he would have his opponents outflanked.
And then 3 heads of the Royal Colleges said to me, "Well, why don't we go out and have meals to talk about some of these matters?" And I said to them, "All right, what about the Café Royal?" So they had a famous do in the Café Royal. I, of course, had been to the Café Royal many more times than they had.
They're also amazed that he could use knife and fork and speak English.
They were rather surprised because the newspapers had well given a different impression of the way you used to eat.
Bevan embarked nothing less than a charm offensive. It worked. He quickly struck a deal with the consultants.
Under the NHS, consultants would be paid for work in hospitals, which they'd previously done for free. They would have access to pay beds for their private patients, and as extra carrot, there would be a scheme of confidential merit awards to compensate high flyers for any loss of income. By any standards, it was a generous deal, and Bevan knew it. They to confess, "I stuffed their mouths with gold."
If the consultants had been silent, row with GPs was about to get louder.
They didn't treat the general practitioners fairly, and this lay behind the worst of the difficulties.
Bevan's plan to end the sale of practices alarmed older GPs who were intending to retire on the proceeds. But their main fear was that they would be forced to become state employees, lose their financial and clinical independence.
They were scared of their wit, particularly because some of the terrible newspapers, they screech against it, tried to portray Nye as if he was some kind of new Hitler who was going to take over their interfere in their precious profession.
Dr. Alfred Cox, the former secretary of the BMA, accused Bevan of wanting to be a medical Führer, and said of his plan, "It looked to me uncommonly like the first step, and a big one, towards National Socialism as practiced in Germany." But the GP's chief spokesman was Dr. Charles Hill, who'd become famous during the war as the radio doctor.
Something personal in this, something in that doctor-patient relationship, something private and confidential, which is essential to good medicine. Break into that, make the doctor not your doctor, but the state's doctor. No longer your friend, your advocate, and you'll have done some damage to medicine, literally impossible to repair.
At the beginning of 1948, with just 6 months to go before the NHS was due to be launched, the BMA balloted its members.
It's obviously quite a job sending out the BMA plebiscite of 56,000 doctors, asking them, roughly speaking, whether they approve of Miss Bevan's scheme.
The doctors voted almost 8-1 against serving under the new act. It was a devastating blow, but a series of BMA meetings up and down the country reflected the strength of feeling. Avis Hart's husband, Roscoe, a surgeon, was a member of the Socialist Medical Association and in favour of the NHS.
There was a meeting in Birmingham Town Hall about the NHS. He was held down. I remember now him coming home absolutely white and shaken because of the fury and opposition to the institution of the NHS.
Dr. Richard Doll, recently returned from forces, was another supporter of the proposals.
In May 1948, there was a motion that this division of the BMA will have nothing to do with the National Health Service, and I attended the meeting and got up to speak against the motion, and it was a bit of an uproar at first. The chairman could know this young man speaking, but then there was a vote.
And what was the vote?
The motion was carried that it would have nothing to do with the National Health Service by 220 to 4. Often one or two of the other 3 words voted with me on that.
Your speech didn't carry the day?
It did not, no.
Both Bevan and the GPs were now firmly dug into their positions. With just 2 months to go before the NHS opened its doors,
Thank you, Doctor.
it began to look as if Bevan might lose the battle after all. But then once again he outmanoeuvred his enemies. He promised the worried GPs that it would take further act of Parliament to turn them into civil servants.
More right than any class.
The BMA went back to its members. The new ballot revealed that the doctors were split down the middle, but the truth was they were in full retreat.
On July 5th, the new National Health Service starts. Have you chosen your family doctor?
The logic was overwhelming. Given the choice, patients who'd get free treatment from doctors who joined the NHS were unlikely to stay with those outside who still charged. Despite the leader's opposition, GPs began to sign up in their thousands. With just 5 weeks to go, BMA bowed to the inevitable and agreed to take part.
This seemed to us to be one of the biggest, most important reforms that could be in this country, and it was really very, very exciting. There was so much emotion about it too. You couldn't help but be enthused by the whole thing if you were in favour of it.
Now just one question about the National Health Service remained to be answered. Would it work?
But it tries sometimes, you might find you get what you need.
The best coffee breaks deserve the best beans in a special blend. That great taste. Britain's best loved coffee. Nescafe Original.
Was not available for coffee. You've just heard the World Cup being cancelled.
Come on! He's watching it. Never mind. Well, he's watching the football. 90 minutes of chat, just 90p with BT.
On July 5th, 1948, Britain became the first Western country to offer free medical care to its entire population.
That day, they didn't tell us what was going on, but as patients, we knew something was going on because all the nurses were running about like, blue tail flies, and we knew that the matron was in a bad mood.
The patient noticed that 2 were being chosen. 2 issued with white, clean counterpins. We went and did all the corners and threatened any male patient he was not allowed to be a pretext at all. They were all there sitting up, looking healthy with the white counterpins.
Eventually, one of the nurses told us that Sir Aaron Bevan was going to come to hospital. He was going to inaugurate the National Health Service with a wonderful system.
Sylvia Diggory, then 13 years old, became National Health Service's official first patient. And she recalls Bevan calmed even the matron out of her bad mood.
He was very, very witty, full of vigour. When you come across a human being who's bursting with life. And this combination won her over in about the first picosecond. And he had a dream, and his dream showed, and he was getting his dream.
I think he must have had some minor suspicions in the ward, and within moments they were leaping out of the bed trying to practice sense and standing on the lockers, beds all in disarray, shouting, come over here, I'll talk to my examiner. Chaotic, all that work beforehand, immaculate days.
swear on that day, the extent of unmet medical need became dramatically apparent. At Hammersmith Hospital, police had to be called out 2 nights in a row to control the queues of patients that had begun forming in anticipation. The most remarkable scenes were played out not in hospitals, but in the surgeries of ordinary GPs.
I certainly found, when the health service started on the 5th of July, 48, for the next 6 months I had as many as 20 or 30 ladies came to see me who had the most unbelievable gynecological conditions. I mean, of that 20 or 30, there'd be at least 10 who had complete prolapse of the room, and they had pulled it up with a towel as if they had a hard nappy on.
Do you think their lives changed completely, almost in a day?
Oh yes, definitely. There's an awful lot of people's lives were changed by the health service.
In 1948, Dr. Pat Rawlins began working as a country GP. He too discovered extremes of silent suffering caused by reluctance to call the doctor.
The country people in Norfolk were very, very poor. There were people who'd been in bed for years and years. Well, there were long-standing cases of tuberculosis just quietly dying away in homes, you know.
But with the coming of NHS, even the most stoic of sufferers got treatment.
Well, this old lady, I was told that she'd been in bed for 50 years. Would I come and see what could be done about it? So I'd been seeing her for 2 or 3 months, I think, on and off. And one day she said to me, would you come upstairs and see my husband? He's been in bed for 9 years.
With the burden of payment lifted, patients were also instantly more willing to call out the doctor in what appeared to be emergencies.
A man I knew got a call late at night on July the 5th from a remote farmhouse. The wife, the farmer, said, Doctor, can you come at once? We think Father's had a stroke. So he jumped into a car and rushed out. And when he got out there, to his surprise, there was no light showing, and he rang the bell, and somebody opened the window up above and said, oh, is that you, Doctor? Oh, it's all right. He'd simply got both legs into one leg of his pyjamas.
Other health workers also found the new day brought a new attitude from their patients. In July 1948, George Wynne was working as a male nurse in Manchester. One patient was particularly grateful for his attention.
The day before nationalisation, he thanked me very much. He did realise that I spent more time with him than I should. Right, thank you very much, see you tomorrow.
Next day, July 1948, George got a shock.
8:15, the voice boomed out. Hey Jack, how much longer am I going to have to wait? And who was it but the man yesterday? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I told him not to talk to me in that manner, and his reply was, why not? You're nothing but a so-and-so civil servant. So we then came civil servant.
In the first year of the NHS, the scale of demand took almost everyone by surprise. Production of spectacles was stepped up as a 5-month wait developed. Dentist after dentist found themselves booked solid.
When the NHS came along, everybody dashed to the dentist, the opticians, the doctor, the hospitals. I mean, literally dashed along. They went a bit mad, you know. I personally went and got 2 pair of glasses.
The ambulance would draw up, the door would open, and out would come hordes of people, elderly people. The elderly ladies would want their varicose veins doing. The men would want the base cysts removing. Why? Does it hurt you? No. Why do you want it removing? It's free. Everything's free.
In the first 2 years, the drug bill tripled, from 13 to 41 million pounds. Devon admitted, I shudder to think of the ceaseless cascade of medicine which is pouring down British throats. Not everything was going down their throats.
One old dear used to ask me every week, please may I give her a roll of cotton wool? I did this for about 6 weeks. They said, what's the matter, dear? Why do you need so much cotton wool? Do you have leg ulcers and you wrap them up in the cotton wool? Hey, nail it, she said. I'm stuffing pecoses.
It wasn't just patients who took unfair advantage of the new system, as Charlie Bannister discovered in the chemist shop he now ran.
I shall never forget it. Doctors coming in with the pads in their hands, writing anything they think of. Rolls of cotton wool, very expensive. Gauze tissues, all sorts of things. And they used to say, can't we think of anything else?
Their patients?
For themselves.
Right, so it's abuse straight away.
Abuse straight away. I could do nothing.
They'd lay this all up and take it away.
Our stuff from our chemists to take it out. They're waiting cars.
They weren't alone. Dentists who got a particularly good deal under the NHS were paid by the filling.
We'll make hay while the sun shines. We'll make love when it rains.
But temptation got the better of a dentist Jerry Woodliff, just employed.
After being there for about an hour, a nurse came in to me. She was very embarrassed. She said, I don't want my business, but we just had a patient in that you have examined and who you had marked required 1 filling.
Said 1 filling.
And he's out on 14 fillings in 10 minutes.
What did he say?
Well, he said, I think you're crazy. He said, you're sitting on a fortune here.
The need to modernise below-standard hospitals and purchase new equipment all added to the bill. In the first 3 years, the NHS budget rose from £200 million to £300 to nearly £400 million. With costs apparently spiralling out of control, the government dispatched MD Stephen Taylor in an abortive attempt to reassure the public.
And I pretend I'm pain, I never feel like pain, I'm only painting the clouds with sunshine.
So far, the National Health Service has been getting along remarkably smoothly, indeed far better than we dared to hope. Millions of you have got those spectacles you need, and tens of millions of you have visited the doctor under the scheme and got your medicine. Provided we're reasonable in our demands, particularly during the coming months when always at its heaviest, there's no danger whatever that the National Health Service will break down.
The spectacular rise in costs was the exact opposite of what had been envisaged in the Beveridge report. Beveridge had believed that the cost of free health service would fall, not rise over time, because people would become more and more healthy, and healthy people wouldn't need treatment. Instead, Bevan was forced to go back to the Cabinet again and again to ask for more money.
Taliban's last recruit moving for the attack on Tagur.
In 1950, the Chinese invasion of Korea, the money finally ran out. Martial aid from America had been crucial in funding the new NHS. Now American pressure forced Britain to divert funds to a massive rearmament programme. Spending on the NHS was frozen. A year later, despite protests from Bevan, his cabinet ended the completely free health service and brought in charges of dentures and spectacles.
I remember having a phone call in the morning told to bring my typewriter down to Cliveden Place, the sun was afoot, and I remember typing the actual letter that was sent to Atlas.
In the letter announcing his resignation, Bevan wrote, "It is the beginning of the destruction of those social services in which Labour has taken a special pride, and which were giving Britain the moral leadership of the world." But the infant NHS survived the cap on spending, instead continuing to spiral out of control. Over the next few years, expenditure flattened out. Another of the main reasons was simple good fortune.
We were very lucky, of course, penicillin had come in towards the end of the war, and just as the NHS was starting a lot of other antibiotics, which would deal with things that penicillin couldn't.
In the first 10 years of the NHS, the number of beds needed to treat infectious diseases fell by 3/4, and child mortality halved.
There is an argument that health service is terribly overrated because what mattered was the introduction of new drugs to treat diseases, and that actually, no matter what system there was, health would have improved.
Well, that's right, Andrew. Could people have got the new drugs? Could they have got treatments? The answer is that in many cases, no. Unless they could afford to call a doctor in and could afford to pay for the drug, they wouldn't have had it. So the National Health Service was just as important as the introduction of the new service.
In 1953, I was told my husband was suffering very badly with TB of the lungs. He used to have an injection of streptomycin every day, and the nurses used to tell us it was £1 an injection. No way could have afforded such marvellous treatment for him to heal and cured and better today, only for national health.
When Charlie Chaplin, who'd grown up in slums London, returned to country his birth in 1952, he was in no doubt about the effect of the NHS.
I used to look at those little pale faces of the company kids where I came from, their rotten teeth and everything else, and one felt infant about it. Today you have social medicine. I think it's doing a great deal. I see rosy-cheeked children, bright, vigorous, active, smiling up with confidence. They are the future of England. If nothing else, civilized medicine, if I may say so. It's a grand thing for that reason.
By the time the Labour government fell in 1951, the National Health Service was so firmly established that no subsequent government could even contemplate dismantling it. You might argue about means, but no one would dispute the end. But if the lives and expectations of ordinary people had been transformed, the things we now regard as modern, waiting lists, shortages, allegations of waste, were already apparent. Yet Bevan saw these problems in an entirely different light. He said at the time, "We will never have all we need. This service must always be growing, changing and improving. It must always appear to be inadequate." And perhaps that's the point. The fact that after 50 years, the NHS still appears inadequate, but we still expect more than it can ever deliver, is not a mark of failure at all. It's a tribute to its extraordinary success.
Dr. Pat Rollins still remembers the way he found at the time to immortalise the man many regard as the father of the NHS.
When your doctor rings, he brings pennies from heaven. M&B to you and me is pennies from heaven. You'll find elastic stockings all over town. And if your double rupture keeps coming down, Get yourself a brand new Brooks to keep your pass in. If you've got anemic looks, just send your cards in. And if you're going thinner, can eat dinner or tea, there'll be pennies from heaven for you and for me.
False Cradle to Grave season continues on Wednesday 9 o'clock with a look at 50 years of Manchester's Royal Infirmary. A young girl's strange behaviour begins to tear her family apart. Kathleen Turner and Tommy Lee Jones star in House of Cards next.
Inside this tiny PC is a big built-in advantage. We make it technology so advanced, it will handle the software of the future. Our home entertainment system has the latest Intel Pentium 2 processor. It gives you awesome graphics at breathtaking speed. Yet all this quality comes at a remarkably low price, because we don't just make our PCs, we sell them direct in our own nationwide showrooms. Come and see amazing tiny PCs with Intel Pentium 2 processors. Call 0800 321 for your nearest showroom.
The Nokia 5110 is the first mobile phone with covers you can change yourself in seconds. For freedom of expression, the Nokia 5110 with Nokia Express on covers. Nokia, connect people.
When we think about making our savings grow on the stock market, many of us won't even dip our toe in the water because we think it's complicated, only for the rich, and we might lose everything.
Wrong, wrong, wrong.
Change the way you save. The Advanced Savings Account Pack. Call 0800 626262.
You won't admit you love me, and so how am I ever to know? You always tell me, perhaps, perhaps, perhaps. A million times I ask you, and then I ask you over.
Well,
Yes!
You've done that. You've earned money back. What do you do now? The new Blue Card from American Express pays you to do more.
At last, the kiss.
Oh, he'll make believe if you wanna know if he loves you so. It's in his kiss.
Single, successful, and falling apart. Ali McGill, Wednesday at 10 on 4.
Does she belong to the twilight and mist?
Is the eve of the Great War.
Isabel, how strange to have a cultivated woman in the house again. No intoxicating.
A family of men and the woman whose love almost tore them apart.
Followed all the rules. And you followed none of them.
Legends of the Fall, Saturday at 9 on 4.
Now for a tonight film, Troubled Mind topples A House of Cards.
Why do people dream?
To see things better.
Where do people come from?
The gods made them.
Where do the gods live?
They live in every living thing.
Why did they eat people?
They were bored. They did people around to entertain.
Why do the gods let people die?
People don't die. They go from one home to another.
Do not tell me a story.
Which one?
Great grandmother Lightning, the first few people out of White and Yellow Corn.
Oh, yes. Well, then, she gave them the power to see everything. They could see through walls.
They could see through rocks.
They could even see inside each other. Today, we can do this only in our dreams.
So if we were both dreams, you wouldn't have to tell me the rest of the story. I would already know it.
Ándale. Now pay attention. One day, Huracán, the great god of the sky, he became so yellow that people...
Yellow?
Okay, yellow that people... This made great-grandmother sad, and she decided to return this mad way of seeing to some very special children.
Mehem Halalo Hubatilito.
Mehem Palalo Hu Atalu Wiko, the children who can see. They can only use this sight in dreams, where there are no words.
Why are there no words?
Because it's easier to see without words.
What do they see?
They see the world as it really wants to.
Like in dreams?
Yes, like in dreams.